All right, so we are on the 5th episode now.
Yeah.
We got done talking about incrementality studies, and we threw a little bit of other like buzzwords in there. We talked about A/B testing and some other measurement tools. So we're going to now give some real examples on how brands can choose A/B testing versus incrementality. Hopefully, everybody walks away from this episode knowing which tool to use in their toolkit when they are looking at channel assessment or vendor assessment as well. So to kick us off, knowing that you have background in sort of a software and vendor on the vendor side, how are brands assessing you guys and how are they measuring success?
Yeah, totally. So I think like this is actually a really great way to sort of articulate one of the actions you can take away from this, which is you can assess the effectiveness of a vendor with various study types. And so the way we tend to get assessed is with like a clean A/B split test. And I'll explain the context and the rationale for why I think that is a reasonable way to assess our effectiveness. So the way we position the business objective, so going back to sort of the previous episode around, hey, know and agree to what you're actually trying to accomplish, is we say, hey, we believe that we can help you drive an increased ROI on your ad spend in the channel that you deploy us on, right? And so that is the hypothesis. And given that it is within that channel, what we are able to then do is, okay, within the channel, I want you to set up a clean A/B split on a certain type of campaign. So generally we will say on prospecting. So picking an audience that is self-similar. None of these people have ever been exposed to the brand before, ideally, right? Again, these platforms are not perfect, but ideally they've never been exposed to the brand before. You run a clean A/B split, which means that the platform is choosing if a person sees this one, then they won't see the other one. If they see A, they won't see B. If they see B, they won't see A. And then measuring the differences in the return on ad spend between those two groups, right? And then we feel like we can say with high confidence, assuming that there are enough events that happen, that you are driving a greater ROI on your ad spend when you're using our tooling than when you are not, right? But again, we're really clear about the context and the way that the A/B test needs to be set up. And so, as a brand, as you're evaluating vendors, you need to think about what is that vendor doing? Are they adding a net new channel, or are they increasing some business metric within an existing channel? And then I think you would choose the type of study that you would want to do based on that, right? Like our last episode, we talked about adding a channel. We talked about adding TikTok, and incrementality or like experimentation from the incrementality standpoint was like really helpful in that context.
Yeah.
So I guess you've done a ton of different types of tests. So like you've done the A/B test with us, right? But you're also designing like, I think off episode, we were talking about the various types of testing you're doing. Yeah. I'm really curious about how you think about not only A/B testing, but hey, here's like a strategy that we want to think about. Walk us through the decision-making of which type of studies you'll consider and why. So, and which channels you're starting to think about unlocking.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to do this under the sort of the perspective of a vendor. Like I'm doing vendor assessment, and then we can do channel one as well. So with a vendor, I always start with the costs, right? Like how much are you going to cost me? How much are you eating into my contribution margin and my EBITDA? So
I can tell you that was true with firsthand experience.
Yeah.
The very first Loom video I got back from Bryan was like, I noticed this thing about your cost. Just so you know, that means that this is the metric you have to beat. And I was like, we're totally aligned.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And that's where I was going to get to. That understanding what is the lift that's required for the cost to pay for themselves. I never look at vendors as cost centers. I think everyone is a profit center. If you work with vendors that have benefits to the business, whether that's saving time from a management or overhead perspective, or actual revenue performance impact, it's a profit center. So I always start by understanding what the costs are And I love to like map this out in a spreadsheet. And I basically have, here's where we currently are. Here's what you could get us to after your fees. And I look for that inflection point, or that sort of that point of return where here is the percent of lift necessary for your fees to pay for themselves. And anything above that, we're golden. We're making money. I don't care if you charge me $1 million. I mean, I would care, but if you charge me $1 million, it's okay, because you're driving such an immense lift in sales and volume that you're still profitable. And so when you have that, you can get sort of alignment from the vendor, but as well as the brand, in saying, oh, could we hit 5% lift? Right? You know, do you guys typically see a 5% lift? Yeah, Bryan, we always see 15, 20%. Great. I see the confidence, 5%. I feel confident you could hit 5%. Great. We see that this is achievable. If your fees are such that the lift necessary is 50%, and I'm like, hey, could you hit 50%? You're like, we typically see 5%. Then, we need to have a discussion about that. And it goes back to our previous episode. Like, we need to define our objectives. We need to do that feasibility, hypothesis and then feasibility, and see, is this even feasible? Can we actually hit this? So I start there. Once I know what the minimum lift that's necessary for a vendor that is going to be activated within a respective channel, meaning one channel or two channels, I'll do an A/B test within the channel, and I'll do them independent of each other. So with you guys, we did a 5-cell test. It was a split test, and we had like cell A was the control. Cell A was what we did. It was what you're being gauged against. And then the 4 other cells were for fun. Like, I love testing. I remember you were like, hey, we really just need 2 cells. It's what we bring to the table versus what you currently have. And we had this discussion like, well, how could the results change if we drove to this page? What about if the ads came from this profile or this page? What if the ads were this type of ad instead? And so we had all these other questions. We're like, you know what? Let's design a 5-cell test. So we're still measuring against the control, split cell A. And then we had these other cells, which were just slight different iterations of each other. And we ran it in an A/B test. They started at the exact same time. They ended at the exact same time. We ran for 2 weeks. They each had an investment of $500 each. And ahead of that test, we both we aligned on what the experiment would look like. I remember sending over a spreadsheet with like all of the cells mapped out. And I was like, here's the ads, here's the ad copy. We're like full transparency here. I remember your team, Sarah, she had feedback on like, hey, what if you changed it to this? And I was like, this great idea. Awesome. And we ran the test. Once we ran the test, we looked at a variety of metrics. I remember like our metric of success, our North Star was ROAS, but we were very open-minded in saying, okay, what's the click-through rate? What's the cost per add to cart? What is the ROAS? Now, what's the ROAS in 1-day click? What's the ROAS in 7-day click?
Yep.
What is it in view through? And then we also looked at it in an attribution tool, an analytics platform. And I remember we were flipping between first click as well and last click. And we found such like massively meaningful insights that there wasn't like one clear winner. This is the right way of doing it. We found options across different scenarios. Bryan, if your goal is driving awareness and consideration, you should run the ad under these settings. From this page, this profile, this is the type of creative you should use. But if you want conversion and you want to drive last click ROAS to scoop up sales from people that are already familiar with the brand, this is the right configuration. And I think that was such a brilliant way of analyzing the results, setting it up the test, and then analyzing the results because it gave us options. Yep. And we could find success, we could find stories, and we can find ways where it worked and ways where it didn't. And we were able to sort of establish a playbook. So when we activate media through you guys, now we know if this is our objective and goal, this is how we set it up. If our objective and goal is this other business objective, then this is how we set it up. And I mean, I think that's the right way of thinking about things. A lot of people get caught up on like, no, it's just last click ROAS. That's it. But you're completely blind to all these other areas where there's influence. Yeah.
So we've actually touched on 2 things I want to make sure people are able to follow. Mm-hmm. One is we designed an A/B test, but it was not actually a simple 2-cell A/B test. It was actually a 5-cell A/B test. And then the second thing is that we actually designed such that we could track what happens over time. So we actually designed so that basically not only could you track what was happening across the 5, but you could actually also track what was happening in the customer journey. So basically, like using a third-party tool. So we were using a third-party tool to tell us information around, was it first click, was it last click? Or we were using in-platform tools to tell us, hey, is this like an instant purchase on the 1 day versus the 7 day versus the view, right? And so we were using all of that to help us understand, here is the best way and here is the consumer journey that gives us that best outcome, right? Now, I want to go back to like the question originally to you around, hey, how do you, so this is on vendor valuation, and hopefully people are able to do a similar thing to what you guys did with us. Now let's think about channel evaluation, right? So you're very lucky. Nood is growing incredibly fast, and it is time for you to consider new channels, right? To like increase the ways in which consumers learn about you, interact with you. And so when you're doing that, how do you decide what type of study allows for you to have confidence in activating a new channel?
Yeah. So, I mean, it is that 3-step process. I'll give the example of podcasts. I'm testing podcasts right now. And with podcasts, we had this objective of driving greater awareness through audiences that we felt fell aligned with our avatar and persona. And we wanted to drive that awareness for basically for future purchases. We didn't need an ROI day one. In fact, we would have been happy if, we made up like 75 to 80% of the acquisition cost of that purchase. And so we first thought about ways of setting up a match market test. And that's what we really wanted to do. Unfortunately, we couldn't.
Sorry, what is a match market test? Let's just make sure we define these things.
Yes. So a match market test is kind of like a split test, but you're doing it at the geographical level. Yep. You are saying, here are the states that we want to run media to. Here are the states that we're not. And you're creating that sort of baseline to measure against. And so we wanted to do that. But with podcasts, it's very difficult to have very clear like targeting on a geographical level. Mm-hmm. And it would have increased our costs. And it would have, when we set it up originally, and we're like, oh, okay, it's difficult, but you can do it. But this is the new cost. Once you play around with feasibility, now you're like, wait a second. It's not feasible for us to acquire purchases at $500 given the expected conversion rate and given the CPMs that we currently had. And so we're like, no, this doesn't look right. So we actually looked past the match market test, and instead we're now using attribution as our tool of measurement. So we partnered up with a tool called ArtSci, or a vendor called ArtSci. ArtSci installs a pixel, and they're basically, I think they're the go-to vendor for audio measurement. And so with that pixel, the podcast publisher, the SSP, they send all the impression logs to ArtSci. ArtSci sees, basically who the listeners are. And then they're able to see if the visitors come on the website and how long it takes them to come on the website. And it sends all that data back. So it's really smart. But it's attribution. So they send me a weekly report. They send me clicks, impressions, add to carts, specific landing page visits, and we have also purchases. And then I take all of that and I do some math, and I calculate what my cost per click is, cost per add to cart, and I calculate my cost per purchase. It's helpful. Under normal or under perfect circumstances, we would have had some match market testing done, and I would have already had my model built out. We're in process of building out the model, our media mix model. But I was okay with attribution because I went into this with 2 clear questions I wanted to answer. One, does podcasts drive website visitation, right? And can I attribute that website visitation? And so I had 2 methods. One was the ArtSci pixel, which was great. Deterministic. Here's what's happening. Here's what we're recording. Awesome. But when we set up the podcast, we actually set it up so that there was a vanity URL. So people would go to nood.com / and then the host name.
Totally.
So people would listen to that and they would go to the host name.
Totally.
And we could actually track to see how many visits would come through that host name. Now, it's not perfect because guess what? A good ad, people are going to remember the brand. They may forget the host name or like the full URL. They're driving, they're working out, so they might go to Google. So it doesn't capture all of it, but we're able to use that directionally. We're able to sort of assess to see like how far off are we from what Art's saying. The second thing that we did is we use post-purchase surveys.
Yeah.
So post-purchase surveys, and I'm not, again, just like Google Analytics, I'm not looking at it at face value. I'm not saying, $5,000 or, 10 purchases. This is how many you drove. I'm looking at it as a percentage. So, last 7 days, 4 or 5% of purchases came from podcasts, people selected podcasts. And I can then use that information to extrapolate, what the total volume of purchases is and sales. And I can then use that to like back into my attribution. So even though I'm using attribution, even though we talked about, hey, attribution is kind of a limited way of measuring, we did have these other tools that are in our toolkit to get a better picture. And at the end of the day, my underlying question was, does podcast drive site visitation? Which we check, we're able to measure that. And then I wanted to see if the site visitation would convert, which we don't have that answer, right? There is reported conversions. I don't know if they're incremental. I don't know how many of these were people that we're already hitting on Google or Facebook. So I'm happy with having the answer to question 1. And it gives me confidence to then go back into this test once we have a model, or we can maybe do that match market test at a higher investment level. And I have more confidence to be able to, shell out more money for round 2 of the test. But we're being super methodical, again, crawl, walk, running our way into testing that channel.
Okay. So far we've talked about when you're doing vendor evaluation, single channel, you like setting up these A/B tests, being really clear about how do I make you as the vendor ROI positive on day 1? What are the metrics you need to hit? Mm-hmm. And then when you're doing channel evaluation, you're like, hey, for me, ideal state outcome, I can run like a real experiment. In this case, it was a match market study, so that way you could actually test. But because of the cost, you were like, okay, I'm going to use directional indicators that come from attribution and from survey data to help me understand, am I driving basically new, I don't want to use the word new, but am I driving website visits that I can actually say came from this pod?
Yes.
In some way, shape, or form.
Is this pod influencing behavior?
Exactly.
Whether or not they came, they already knew about the brand or they were being targeted.
Exactly.
I just want to see if people would go to the site after listening to the podcast.
Exactly. And so then that can inform with increased spend level and therefore increased revenue, whether or not you want to invest into doing an actual like incrementality study or match market study. Now, that actually makes me ask the second question, which is, I feel like people want to get on TV. Mm-hmm. Okay. Like most D2C brands, the way they want to get on TV is they want to get on Shark Tank. but let's just say the way that you get on TV is you run ads on TV, right? So you're running ads on TV. Where would you say is the right way to think about what type of measurement technique to use to make sure that TV ad is actually driving the outcomes that you want? And have you thought about this for Nood?
Absolutely. So TV is a new frontier. So every year we build out our test and learn roadmap of what channels we want to test. How do we diversify our channel mix? TV is up there along with display ads as well. And for CTV, we want to do it right. I see a lot of potential with the channel. I see that the channel, could be amazing for awareness and could really create this halo effect of ad recall and awareness that then lifts up the performance of Google as people search for the brand, as well as Facebook as they get retargeted or as they start learning more about IPL or our industry. And so with CTV, we want to design a match market test. We're going to be using those open source tools that I discussed earlier. And we're basically going to run all of our revenue data, have it analyzed, have the tool tell us what the markets are, and split that out. We actually did this with Snapchat last year, and it was so insightful. It gave us the incremental ROAS during that time period, and then I was able to match that back to the ROAS that Snapchat reported. And that's what we want to get to with connected TV is what is this ROAS that the platform reports and what is the incremental? And now we know if ROAS is, going up, then we can assume that this is likely in creating more incrementality. If it's going down, then we assume that it could be hurting incrementality. We'll have to calibrate it because, as I mentioned earlier, there's sometimes inverse relationships there. But that's the goal for Match Market or for CTV. We already talked to the CTV provider, and they confirmed that they're able to set it up by DMAs and regions. We got an estimated cost per acquisition that's incremental and back that into a budget. And we're like, okay, we could totally do this budget. And we're going to try it in-house. I am also looking at other partners as well, other vendors, to support and assist with like the first few. There's consultants, there's a bunch of agencies and partners that can help with match market testing. But yeah, we want to do that one right. But we also have the option of some of the other items that we did with podcasts, or we could also do like CRM lists and upload a list, randomize it, do holding control there.
Yeah. So, okay, this is awesome because now I feel like I've learned a lot about I didn't even know that you guys did this with Snapchat, which is super interesting. But yeah, it really makes you realize that you can do these types of studies for any new channel that you're doing. It's not like reserved for TV or reserved for something that like feels out of reach from a measurement point of view. Like you should think about it in general. And then if it's not accessible, then you have fallback strategies that are still directionally very useful, right? So hopefully for those of you listening, you have really clear, actionable ways now to decide what am I trying to learn from this channel? How do I actually measure it? And what are the strategies I can use to measure it? And if one of them is not accessible to me, how do I best use the data that I do have?
Let's add a little bit more controversy to today's topic.
Yeah.
PMAX. That's it. That's all I got to say. Controversy.
Man.
PMAX is the talk of the town right now for all of our Googlers. You have one side of the group that's saying, hey, PMAX is just investing into brand. It's not incremental. Totally. It's all brand. And you have this other group that's like, no, the brand is necessary because it creates signal and feedback loop to optimize towards new conversions. And it's just a massive debate. How do you solve that? Incrementality test.
Yep.
I think the takeaway I wanted to get to is that it doesn't always have to be at the channel level. You can also do these incrementality tests at the platform level, at a strategic level, right? To put it in Facebook terms, you could do an incrementality test of CBO versus ad set budget optimization, or
advantage shopping,
yep. Right? The A is C plus. So with these incrementality tests, they're not limited to the channels. You can go down even to the ad level if you really wanted to. That's quite granular, but you could. And so rather than debating, like, no, this is the right way, this is the right way, I would advise looking at, especially for something like PMAX. PMAX is you can't really like split test a PMAX. How do you have a control like PMAX versus not PMAX? Because the reported numbers are going to be inflated, and that's the whole like point of why people are upset about PMAX is that it's going towards brand dollars, which inflates the performance. So you could run an incrementality study, run PMAX on one set of audiences, or do a sort of a measure it against a baseline, yep. And see how that influences your performance, your revenue, and you would have your answer there.
Yep.
I think Google is working on some incrementality test studies as well. I think I saw a white paper flying around, so I'll see if we can link it there. But
that's
you can
awesome.
see how they designed it, and then you can maybe take inspiration to design your own version as well.
Okay. That's amazing. So now you can test channel, You can test strategies in a channel after listening to this episode, and you can do vendor assessment in a super clean way. So you have hopefully a bunch of really actionable things that you can do after this episode. And then in the next episode, we're just going to help you think through what are the different things that have changed since Apple's privacy change. Now, again, this is a kind of hot topic because I feel like everybody on the one hand talks about it a lot and feels like they're informed on it, but the ways that it shows up in the decisions that you need to make are actually non-obvious. And so, yeah, I'm super excited for the next episode where we dive into where are the places where it should help you make different decisions since Apple has made that change. We'll see you in the next one.